This is a film about a world in which surveillance has no limits and what can happen when it's in the hands of repressive governments.
فتلاقي الناس إنه الحيطان له ودان، الآن الجوالات له ودان.
This is the story of how British technology may have helped silence a generation in the Arab world.
Well, each and every case where someone is silenced or ends up in prison with the help of EU-made technologies, I think is unacceptable.
Our investigation shows how Britain's leading weapons manufacturer has profited from exporting sophisticated, officially classified equipment.
Every country willing to write a paycheck to the right party can do this sort of surveillance, but nobody wants to admit it.
We reveal that some of this equipment is so powerful that foreign governments who've bought it have the capability of using it against the UK and its allies, threatening national security. In this film, we show that powerful British cyber surveillance equipment has secretly been sold to repressive governments in the Middle East. Our investigation begins in Beirut, the Lebanese capital.
I've come to Beirut because we've tracked down a cybersecurity expert from the region. He lives out of a suitcase because with so many people at risk, he's constantly traveling to train them on how to protect themselves.
Mohammed Muscati works with human rights organizations, journalists and activists.
So this is my phone.
He's going to show me how easy it is for a government to get access to my phone.
أنا حالياً أنزل البرمجية الخبيثة فيه علشان يعطيني access كامل.
He's infecting it with a spyware program. This could also be done remotely by a government, but it's old-school, off-the-shelf technology. Today, it's possible to pin down someone's location, read their emails, even change their text messages. And that's just the beginning.
باستخدام أجهزة ثانية ممكن أنا أفعل المايك عشان أسمع أو أسوي اتصال أخذ صور عن طريق الهاتف. لهذا أنا كل شيء له علاقة بالكاميرا أغلقته علشان لا أحد يقدر ياخذ صور إلى أي جلسة أو مكان اللي أنا فيه.
I'm leaving Lebanon to start my journey into the Gulf region. But even when I'm in another country, Mohammed will be able to see right into my life.
كانت في الساعة 7 متواجدة في مطار دبي الدولي، وقامت بتغيير شريحة الهاتف إلى شريحة في دبي. وأيضاً نقدر نشوف كل جهات الاتصال اللي نوال سجلتها في الهاتف، وأيضاً كل المسجات اللي قامت بإرسالها أو استقبالها.
And Mohammed is right. I am in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. I've come here to meet Ahmed Mansour. He's an activist who was imprisoned for tweeting about abuses by the UAE government. It spent so much money targeting him that he's become known as the $1 million dissident.
هو طبعاً هذا يعني الإحساس بالمراقبة عموماً إحساس شنيع وسيء، ويحد بالكثير من قدراتك على التحرك بحرية ومقابلة الأشخاص بحرية تامة. هو اختراق لخصوصيتك، كما لو أنه شخص يعني يدخل إلى غرفة نومك.
Ahmed was protesting against unfair trials and arbitrary detention. He was also charged with insulting the nation's leadership. He shows me how his email was hacked, exposing all his messages and contacts.
اللي هو يسموه فيشنج سايت. هو هذا يعني مبين انه من جوجل، بس هو في الحقيقه مش جوجل، هم عاملين صفحه مشابهه لصفحه جوجل، فلما تتغير الباسورد لازم تضع الباسورد القديمه فيلتقطوها فيدخلوا على الايميل بتاعك.
An independent investigator said that the UAE government was almost certainly responsible. Following his release from jail, Ahmed isolated himself to protect his friends and family.
انت الان تخرج من بيتك مش عارف ترجع ولا لا.
I stayed in touch with Ahmed after we finished filming. But then, in March 2017, I heard he disappeared. Weeks later, his family discovered he was being held in solitary confinement without charge in Al Sadr prison in Abu Dhabi. According to the UAE news agency, his crime was using social media to spread false and misleading information that harms national unity and damages the country's reputation. His case has caused alarm worldwide.
So if you look at a context like the UAE, where a human rights defender like Ahmed Mansour has been, punished simply for speaking out against the government in favour of human rights, then the implications of sending or providing sophisticated surveillance equipment to monitor communications of activists and civil society are very serious.
Ahmed was arrested because of his social media posts. But we've discovered that the UAE has the power to monitor his private communications too. In fact, it has the power to monitor all of its people, all of the time. It now has a kind of surveillance that doesn't infect the phone or computer. It's completely external, and so it's almost impossible to detect. It's called mass surveillance.
الماس سيرفيلانس انه هو ان انت تستهدف الناس بشكل عام، تمام؟ مجتمع بشكل عام، اشخاص في منظمه بشكل عام.
As in the West, governments in the Arab world have invested millions in mass surveillance. It's a uniquely powerful tool for learning what the population is up to.
لما نتكلم عن مثلا مجموعه جديده تتعلق بحقوق الانسان ظهرت في دوله معينه، والدولة ما تعرف بالضبط من هو الشخص الفاعل أو الأكتف في هذه المجموعة، فممكن تبدأ معاهم بماس سيرفيلانس، أنه يتم مراقبة كل أعضاء المنظمة بشكل كامل. من خلال المعلومات اللي يتم جمعها بعد مراقبة الأشخاص عن طريق الماس سيرفيلانس يتم تحديد من هم أهم الأشخاص في هذه المجموعة، فيتم تضييق الدائرة قليلاً.
This kind of mass surveillance has chilling implications for all of us. What's shocking is where it's coming from. One of the world's most liberal countries. This is Aalborg in Denmark, a former industrial city, reinventing itself as a center for the new knowledge economy. I'm heading over the bridge to a place called Norisunbu. I'm going to visit a company that specializes in cyber surveillance. It was called ETI. In 2011, it was bought by BAE, the UK's biggest arms manufacturer. Today, it's called BAE Systems Applied Intelligence, and it makes a surveillance system that's been sold to the United Arab Emirates. Around the back, 2 large satellite dishes. An employee wants to know what we're doing.
What's the reason you're filming? You know who makes cybersecurity for?
No, that's what we want to know.
Yeah.
Who do you make cybersecurity
That's why
for?
we don't answer you.
It seems very secretive, whatever it is.
It's a weapon manufacturer. And by that, you will know that being a weapon manufacturer, they're not going to say anything. And so that's the policy.
And nobody would speak to us. But after months of research, we found a former employee who agreed to talk about his former work, provided his identity was disguised. He's portrayed by an actor.
You were always under some kind of surveillance. You weren't sure who your friends were, who your enemies were. There were different rooms you couldn't go into if you didn't have a specific level of clearance. After a while, I was allowed to go into those rooms. That's where they kept the equipment.
This surveillance solution was so closely guarded because of its extraordinary power. It can collect, catalogue, and analyse millions of people's communications, both private and public.
You'd be able to intercept any internet traffic. If you wanted to do a whole country, go ahead. You'd probably need something to narrow your search down, either by a specific person, a specific email address, specific IP address, or specific keywords to search for.
The surveillance tool goes by multiple names, but one of them is Evident. It's one of the reasons BAE wanted to buy the Danish cybersecurity company. This sales brochure describes Evident as a highly sophisticated tool for mass surveillance. And it says it's able to integrate targeted capabilities too.
You could pinpoint people's location based on cellular data. You could follow people around. They were quite far ahead with voice recognition. They were capable of decrypting stuff as well.
Governments have always collected information about us, but we now generate much more data about ourselves. And technological advances make it far easier for the state to collect it.
This is my not-so-secret device. It's sending out information about me every second of the day.
That information is called metadata. It tells the internet service provider my phone is the source of the message, along with dates, times, subject lines, locations,
and numbers or addresses of the people I'm communicating with.
And all you do is basically record what people are doing and search it later. So if I'm an intelligence agency, I need the capability to target anybody. And I don't know until tomorrow who I wish I knew about today. So the easiest solution is just record basically everybody's web browsing and behavior, and then go from there once I have somebody I need to look for.
It's a technology that allows you to rewind time. It can go back years, exposing our each and every search and contact. That's a serious threat to everyone's privacy.
What all this means is that it's possible to monitor a country's entire network of communications. You just need to buy the right kind of high-tech solution. And Evident is one such solution.
Nick Weaver is a frequent visitor to arms fairs like this one in Qatar. It keeps him on top of the fast-evolving technology. Among the conventional arms and war equipment are stalls selling cyber surveillance technologies. Under international law, this kit is defined as military since it has the potential for use as an offensive weapon. Nick is one of the few experts willing to talk openly about mass surveillance.
Every country willing to write a paycheck to the right party can do this sort of surveillance, but nobody wants to admit it.
And why is that? Because it's dangerous?
Because it's creepy. The notion that all your web surfing is captured because all that stuff is unencrypted is just frankly creepy. Even if something is never abused, it just disturbs people.
Creepy or not, there's little doubt that mass surveillance can be used to identify criminals and extremists. According to the Home Office, it's also been significant in every major counter-terrorism investigation of the last decade.
The more terrorist incidents there are, the more people will start to see the benefits of favouring security over privacy. And I sense a mood, and that's all I can do, is sense a mood among the public, that actually that has moved the cursor more in favour of security and away from individual privacy, because people recognise it's a trade-off.
Keep on moving!
More than ever, in the wake of the London and Manchester terror attacks, This trade-off is on the minds of the British public and government. The UK government has a very close relationship with BAE. Last year, the Ministry of Defence spent over £4.6 billion on BAE equipment. And senior government representatives meet with BAE at least once a week. The UK government is considered world expert when it comes to cyber intelligence. And BAE has played a major part in that as a key supplier of technical tools to British intelligence agencies. But the question is, should they be selling similar equipment to foreign governments?
I've come back to Denmark, where some new evidence about BAE and its mass surveillance tool has come to light. I'm meeting reporters from Dagbladet Information, a Danish newspaper. At the daily editorial meeting, Lasse Skue Andersen is briefing colleagues. Lasse and Sebastian Gerding are working with us, investigating the cyber technology made by BAE's subsidiary in Denmark.
In all of these cases, in the copies that we have of the documents, BAE Systems Applied Intelligence is mentioned as the exporter.
BAE needs a Danish license to export from its subsidiary here. Lasse obtained a copy of one of these licenses after making a Freedom of Information Act request to the Danish Business Authority. BAE was asked if they had any objections. They did, so the DBA blacked out some of the details. Also, they thought.
They tried to redact which company was exporting this stuff to the UAE, and they also tried to redact who was the customer in the UAE. But they messed up their redactions. So here, for instance, you can see the end user of the equipment is Ministry of Interior and State of UAE. And you can also see which company is selling the system. I'll just find the place where it's most visible.
Oh, wow.
You can see it says BAE Systems.
Yeah, BAE Systems
Applied Intelligence AS in Nørresundby.
That's incredible. Using the same method of investigation, we've established that BAE has sold its evident technology to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, Morocco, and Algeria. The license spells out exactly what it can do.
You can see here that what they're selling is an IP monitoring and data analysis system to be used for national security and serious crime investigation.
BAE's website says the company sells its products according to normal commercial imperatives. It states that the company respects human rights wherever they operate. In 2016, cyber and intelligence contributed nearly £1.8 billion to company turnover. It's a lucrative business, but no one at BAE was prepared to discuss it. In a statement, the company told us,
"Our technology plays a crucial role in enabling the UK and its allies to combat the threat of international terrorism. BAE Systems is committed to operating ethically and responsibly. We have robust policies and procedures in place to ensure that our international exports to overseas governments are all fully compliant with international export regulations, as well as our own strict criteria to evaluate every potential contract."
So what happens when a country is under surveillance by Evident? I've come to Tunisia to find out. President Zain al-Abidine bin Ali was Tunisia's dictator for 23 years before he was overthrown by democratic forces. He was also an early customer of ETI, the Danish company later bought by BAE. Bin Ali had the evidence system installed in the basement of one of his own houses.
The temptation for a dictator to control his opposition is great. And more than that, Bin Ali wanted to know what people were thinking too.
Today, all that's left in the basement is one old computer rack. Tunisian intelligence is a murky world, but after weeks of searching, we found someone who operated the evidence system for Bin Ali. His job was to monitor the whole of Tunisia's internet activity. an actor portrays him.
الشركة اللي باعت البرنامج والتدريبات كانت على طريق دي تكنيسيان وديزانجينيور في 5 أو 6 أيام. البرنامج يخدم بالموكلي، جوست تدخل اسم المعارض يخرج لك كل المواقع والمدونات والصفحات المرتبطة بالمعارض هذاك.
So an example might be, you know that these are the people at a protest. That's your starting point. Or you might know that you're interested in people who have read a given article, and you go from there and you build basically a profile of what they do. And then if somebody's really interesting, then you can switch to an active attack.
The information evidence provided about websites, social media, emails and blogs was given to a team that worked closely with Bin Ali himself. We found someone from that specialist intelligence unit. His words are spoken by an actor.
ساعات للحصول على المعلومات حول أشخاص معينين، وساعات يجيبوا لي التعليمات باش نحذف محتوى ولا نبدله أو نضيف معلومات أخرى. بعض المعلومات كانت تجي مباشرة للرئيس، وأغلب الأحيان المعلومات هذه تخص المعارضين.
التركيز كان على المعارضة الكل، ما فماش بريفيرونس باش يعرف شكون أصحابه وشكون أعدائه. حتى تفدليك النكت اللي على شخصه كانت تهمه.
The consequences were no laughing matter for those targeted. Bin Ali locked up thousands of his opponents. In Tunisia's prisons, torture and illegal killings were commonplace.
هم كانوا ديما تحت الضغط. كنت ديما نشوف تصاورهم على الانترنت بعد ما يسيبوهم، بعد ما يعذبوهم ويضربوهم.
It was in Tunisia in December 2010 that a spark ignited the Arab Spring. Events that compelled many governments across the region to seek out state-of-the-art surveillance technologies. For BAE, this was an opportunity. The company approached ETI, the Danish producers of the evidence surveillance system, and bought it for £137 million. The deal included long-running contracts with Saudi Arabia. We can reveal that BAE has continued to sell surveillance equipment to Saudi Arabia as recently as 2016. Inside the country, a well-founded fear of surveillance has led many people to change their behavior.
فتلاقي الناس إنه الحيطان له ودان، الآن الجوالات له ودان. فأظن هذا مش سهل لما أنت تكوني متصلة دائماً على الإنترنت، فما تعرفين هذا الإنترنت يعني في التقنيات اللي حتى تفتح كاميرتك وتفتح المايك وتسجل كل شيء وأنت قاعدة وأنت ما تدري وترسلها.
Manal al-Sharif is Saudi Arabia's best-known female activist. In 2011, inspired by the protests in Tahrir Square, she posted a video promoting her campaign to allow Saudi women to drive.
تلاقي واحدة معاها PhD بروفيسورة في الجامعة وما تعرف تسوق.
She was arrested.
أنا لما طلعت من السجن قال لي رئيسي في الشغل في أرامكو، قال لي مكالماتك مراقبة، مسجاتك مراقبة، إيميلك مراقب، إنترنت بيتك مراقب. قال لي انتبهي على الأشياء اللي أنت تسويها.
Manal's campaign was silenced. She believes the Saudi authorities must have hacked her social media.
The knowledge that there is surveillance being carried out by governments is having a chilling effect. If you look at a country like Saudi Arabia, where a few years ago there was an emerging human rights community which was doing some very important work, part of that group has left the country, out of fear for the consequences of what will happen to them. And the other part of that community are too scared to talk to us because of what they fear may happen. And they know that if they do communicate with us, they're very likely to be listened to.
I've heard about a former Saudi Air Force officer who also now lives abroad. Yahya Asiri was caught posting pro-democracy statements online. Fearing arrest, he had to flee his country.
أصبح يعني في هناك خوف شديد. عدد من الأهالي، دعني أعطيك مثال، أكثر من يعني لن أكون مبالغ إذا قلت 90% من النشطاء اللي كانوا نشيطين جدا في 2011 أنهم اختفوا من على الساحة. بعضهم غيرت أفكاره، تغيرت أفكاره بشكل دراماتيكي يعني بعد ما تغيرت الأوضاع في المنطقة، وبعضهم اعتقل وبعضهم تراجع خوفاً.
بالذات عندنا في دول الخليج يعني أظن ما في دولة تراقب شعبها مثل دول الخليج للأسف الشديد، لأنه عندهم الفلوس وعندهم الإمكانية إنهم يشترون اللي هي البرامج المتطورة في المراقبة.
Since filming this interview, Manal has moved to Australia. Like Manal, Yahya felt he had to leave Saudi Arabia. He fears what might happen if people feel they have no freedom of expression.
مع عودة القمع أصبح الشباب يقول أنه آراءكم مجرد أحلام لا يمكن تطبيقها على أرض الواقع، ثم ينحاز إلى التطرف والعنف لأنه قمع التيار الإصلاحي أو التيار الذي يطالب بالتغيير المدني والتغيير السلمي.
When it comes to human rights, Saudi Arabia is at the bottom of the international league, and as a result, BAE's arms sales to the Saudis have always been controversial. Some argue it's actually unlawful for the British government to allow the export of these tools.
If one looks at British arms export law, which covers all sorts of military equipment and training and services, no export license is supposed to be granted if there is a strong chance that the sale of that equipment will increase the likelihood of the breaking of international humanitarian law.
This argument, Andrew Feinstein believes, would also apply to the export of surveillance technology.
I have no doubt that the British government is acting illegally in terms of its own laws in selling cyber surveillance equipment to the government of Saudi Arabia.
We requested interviews with both the Foreign Office and the Department for International Trade, which is responsible for approving exports of cyber equipment. Both declined to speak to us. We have discovered from BAE's export licenses that the company has also sold its mass surveillance system to Oman. So it's the next stop in my investigation. It's long been Britain's main listening post in the Gulf and is still an important ally. I'm here to find out about mass surveillance in action. Because it leaves no trace, it's almost impossible to know it's been used. But sometimes, as in Oman, the evidence is strongly suggestive. Nabhan al-Hanashi's story begins when he was picked up by the authorities after Oman's short-lived Arab Spring.
الاعتقال كان هو اختطاف مش اعتقال. كنت في مقهى وحضروا اثنين واختطفوني من المقهى إلى مكان طبعا مجهول، ما عرفت المكان اللي اختطفوني فيه. استمريت في هذاك المكان لمدة 30 يوم. طبعا زنزانة انفرادية تحت الأرض، فوق الأرض مش عارف بالضبط. ما كنت أعرف حتى وين أنا موجود. ممنوع من كل شيء. أحيانا يزاد عليك التبريد، ينقص التبريد يعني.
Nabhan and his friends were calling for the Sultan of Oman's power to be curbed. That was enough for this paper to brand them as terrorists. Nabhan was jailed for 18 months.
ولكن أيضاً أدركت من ناحية أخرى أنه استمراري في هذا الطريق معناها أنه راح أقضي عمري كله في السجن. فقررت أني أخرج من عمان.
In 2014, Nabhan got asylum in London. People sent him stories of human rights abuse in Oman, so he set up the Omani Human Rights Network to publicize them. All communication with his sources was kept secret.
واللي وصل لي المعلومة ما يعرف أن هذاك الشخص هو اللي تحقق من المعلومة. هي فقط من أجل ضمان نوعاً ما من أجل ضمان سلامتهم كذلك، ومش فقط من أجل الحفاظ على سرية المعلومة.
Despite all Nabhan's efforts, he believes the information sent to him was being intercepted by the Omani government.
بعض اللي كانوا يتواصلوا معي تعرضوا للاعتقال، تعرضوا للمساءلة، تعرضوا للمحاسبة، تعرضوا حتى للسؤال عن كثير من النقاط اللي كانت تحدث فيما بيننا.
I wanted to meet one of those arrested in Oman. We'll call him Saeed to disguise his identity. An actor speaks his words. Saeed says the Omani authorities were watching the network members' private accounts from the outset.
كنت أتواصل مع الشباب في بريطانيا وبالأخص نبهان، لكن ما حد يعرف إن كنا نتواصل أو كيف. ما أعرف بالنسبة للباقين، لكن أعرف هذا الاتفاق اللي بيننا. إذا أنا أرسلت شيء ما حد يعرف حتى لو كان واحد من المقربين.
But the precautions were in vain. All those who wrote to Nabhan were picked up by the authorities.
حيتم استدعائهم وكل شخص كان يكتب يتم استدعائه، ولا نعرف كيف هم يعملوها.
The authorities rounded up 7 members of the network. Nabhan says they were jailed and tortured. All of them had Nabhan as their common contact. I'm asking Nikwiva what this says about the method of surveillance.
That probably suggests that they are doing bulk recording of email metadata.
So bulk recording, do you mean mass surveillance?
Yes, that is the most suggestive evidence of mass surveillance. Once you have a message of interest, then it's a matter of pulling threads. So people talk about surveillance being looking for needles in haystacks, but it's not. What it is you have to start with some piece of information.
Saeed was certain that sooner or later he'd be arrested. He tried to escape from Oman and cross into the UAE. When he arrived at the border crossing, he was detained by the Omani authorities. It's highly probable he'd been tracked.
أنا كنت ساير بسيارة أخوي. أول ما وصلت المركز الحدودي بدون ما أطلع على البطاقة وبدون شيء، تفضل داخل نريدك. سيارة أخوي ما مكتوب عليها اسمي.
We don't know for sure that Evident was the system used to monitor Saeed, but his experience is consistent with what we know about it.
We know that Evident was sold to Oman. Could they have used Evident to do this? And is it this powerful?
It certainly seems that way. Page 26 in the brochure, that it's got cell location viewer, target location. The investigator package specifically has tools for following phone movements. So it integrates into the phone company's data and allows you to get the data from the network operator. So it really looks like they have that as a selling feature.
Saeed was interrogated over 12 days. Even after his release, he believed he was still under surveillance.
صرت أتحفظ خلاص أخاف من كل حد.
Saeed feels it's become too dangerous to report human rights abuses.
خلاص الحراك انتهى. حراك بعمان ما في أبداً. برا الآن.
I'm on my way to a London-based NGO called Privacy International. They investigate government surveillance. Dr. Gus Hussain says that what's happening in the Arab world is part of a disturbing global trend.
That is the greatest tragedy of surveillance when it comes to political reform, the defense of democracy and democratic values, is that surveillance will destroy people's confidence in organizing, in expressing, in sharing ideas, in trying to create a political movement that will all be chilled because surveillance will be everywhere.
This is BAE's London headquarters.
We've been told that if a potential sale poses any big ethical questions, they're debated here. We want to ask BAE about another discovery that we've made that not only poses questions about ethics, but about national security as well. We found out that Evident has a further top secret capability, decryption.
Decryption, also known as cryptanalysis, is a powerful tool that can read the contents of our communications, even if they've been encrypted for security. This decryption capability is considered so vital to our national security that its export is supposed to be tightly controlled. The British government has even denied exports of a similar technology to its close ally, Australia. Yet BAE has sold this kit to the Middle East. We've uncovered an email exchange from 2015 that shows that the UK Export Authority was very worried about the decryption tools BAE was exporting from Denmark. The British told the Danish Export Authority that we would refuse a license to export this cryptanalysis software from the UK because of Criteria 5 concerns.
Criteria 5 refers to the national security of the UK and its allies. The suggestion is that a country could use this software to get access to Britain's own communications.
Professor Ross Anderson is head of cryptography at Cambridge University.
Well, once you have sold equipment to someone, they can probably do with it what they want. You take the case, for example, of an Arab country which wants to buy bulk cryptanalysis equipment, supposedly for its own law enforcement purpose. Now, suppose that they have embassies in London, in Washington, in Paris, and in Berlin, right? What's to stop them from putting bulk surveillance equipment in our cities and then using the cryptanalysis equipment to decipher all the mobile phone calls that they hear in London or Paris or Washington or Berlin?
Despite Britain's objections, the Danish authorities approved the export to the UAE. The Danish Foreign Ministry turned down our request for an interview. In a statement on the export of cryptanalysis equipment, they told us,
if an EU member state makes a request to the Danish Business Authority not to grant an export authorization, if the export might prejudice its essential security interests, then an export authorization will not be granted.
We have also found out that BAE has made other sales of its cryptanalysis software through Denmark to Oman, Qatar, Algeria, and Morocco, in addition to the UAE.
If you enable a Middle Eastern power to get bulk surveillance and cryptanalytic capabilities against mobile phones in London, that's potentially a real strategic threat.
Some argue there could still be a justification for selling these kinds of weapons.
I would imagine the consideration that plays in people's minds is not so much the economic advantage for weapons like this, it's that the security of the state we're talking to is so closely linked to ours, or they are tracking people who are a direct threat to Britain and we need their assistance.
But even at the expense of them not upholding the same values that we uphold here in the UK?
It's a trade-off. None of these countries have the same ethical, moral code as we do in Britain, but we still do it. Every country, therefore, involves some form of compromise, some form of judgment about how those tools are going to be used.
No one in the British government would speak to the BBC about the findings of this film. In a statement, the Department for International Trade said,
"The government takes its defence export responsibilities very seriously and operates one of the most robust export control regimes in the world. All export licence applications are assessed on a case-by-case basis against strict criteria, taking account of all relevant factors at the time of the application, including human rights considerations."
One of the few European politicians prepared to discuss the export of surveillance technology is the Dutch MEP Marietje Schaake.
Well, each and every case where someone is silenced or ends up in prison with the help of EU-made technologies, I think is unacceptable. The fact that these companies are commercial players are developing these highly sophisticated technologies that could have a deep impact on our national security, on people's lives, etc., requires us to look again at what kind of restrictions may be needed, what kind of transparency and accountability is needed in this market before it turns against our own interests and our own principles.
During the making of this film, we met nearly a dozen insiders from BAE, the government, and the intelligence community. They're all bound by legal restrictions, but one of them agreed to have his words spoken by an actor.
At the government level, there are holes and loops in the export license system that no one seems in a hurry to shut. This is partly ignorance, but also companies take advantage of government policies. Ultimately, you have no control over how the countries that buy this stuff use the kit.
In this film, we've shown that a British company is selling cyber surveillance equipment to repressive governments in the Middle East. In addition, by exporting its decryption facility, BAE is giving these governments the potential to turn this same secret and invasive technology against Britain itself. It may be time to look more closely at the new kinds of weapons that Britain is selling.